We've installed the dependencies, and now it's time for us to configure those dependencies. The first thing that you need to configure is ESLint itself. And I've included in this guide an example object that you can use to configure ESLint. So to use this configuration, you need to introduce a new file, top level here in your project, and call this file .eslintrc.js, and then paste an object like this in here. This file is already configured to use the Babel ESLint plugin. It is extending the recommended settings, and you can use this part here to customize the recommended settings. For example, if you want to turn off prop validation, you can just uncomment this example here and use React props off so you don't get warnings about prop validations. Prop types validations is actually really cool, and it's definitely something that you should consider. Okay, let's keep going. We haven't done or even talked about any testing in this course really, so I'm going to skip over the dependencies for Jest. Jest is definitely one of the best options when it comes to testing React applications, and it's a good next step for you to look into. Another thing I'm recommending here is Prettier. And I think Prettier is in the same family as ESLint. This should really be part of your stack, and actually have Prettier configured to work with ESLint, because it does work very well with ESLint. And once you have the configuration, you just save the file to automatically format the file. So take a look at Prettier as well. Okay, so in here, I am proposing an initial directory structure. You don't need to follow this directory structure, but if you follow this exact structure, then the configurations for Webpack is going to be a little bit easier, because these are the defaults that Webpack is going to look for. So let's make these directories. Make directory, dist is for distribution. Make directory source. Source is where we place the actual React application and all the other JavaScript files, including the server files as well. And when we're ready to build things for production, Webpack is going to take our source files and is going to write them into the distribution directory. And under source, we'll create a components directory, and we'll create a server directory to put the web server code in there. All right, let's configure Webpack and Babel. Babel is easy. We've already installed the presets and installed the core library. All we need to do is put this simple object in a babel.config.js file. So on the top level as well, you create a new file, babel.config.js, and you put this object in that file. This object instructs Babel to use these presets when it's time for Babel to process any file. And then another file on the top level as well for Webpack. So copy this and create another file in here, top level. This time it is webpack.config.js, and paste in the content of this file. And this file is simple. We didn't have to specify entry point or output point for Webpack because we're using the defaults. But we do have to tell Webpack to invoke Babel on any file that ends with JS, because this is a React application and I'm going to be using the .js extension for all the React components, which means I'm going to be writing JSX in those React components, and I need Babel to run on those files before Webpack picks them up and include them in the bundle. So that's the syntax that we use for Webpack. We just add a rule here. For every file that ends with a .js extension and is not under the node modules directory, use the Babel loader on it. And the Babel loader is going to pick up the configuration that we just did for Babel and compile all the modern JavaScript into something that your targeted browsers are going to understand. Furthermore, after all these configurations, you need a way to run the Webpack command and to run a web server as well. So that's where you put things in package.json under the scripts in here. You can have many tasks. For example, a task to run all your tests, or a task to run a web server. This is what I did here. This task here, and I named it dev-server. This task will run the nodemon command, and it will execute Babel node on a file that I've decided to place here under server.js, ignoring the dist directory because the dist directory is all generated files, so I don't really need to watch it. So we need to put up an example server.js here, and I've included one in this article. The other command that we need is to create the bundle using the Webpack command. So for that, I named this one dev bundle, and it will run the webpack command with -w and -d. W is for watch, so this would be a watch mode as well for Webpack, and D is for development, so this will generate a development-friendly bundle that we can, for example, debug through, and it's readable. It's not minified, it's not uglified, it's readable. All right, this is all the configuration that you need. Now, to test all this configuration, I've included a sample React application in this guide. So let me quickly put these files in the project that we're testing with. So under components, we create an app.js, and this is the app.js file. Under source index.js, we create this file, and I'll talk a little bit about this file. So this is directly under source, and it's named index.js. This is the DOM renderer. This takes in the app component that I just defined, and it will use React DOM.hydrate on that app component. Now, we didn't really talk about hydrate. Previously, we've done render in the playground, but hydrate is related to server-side rendered content, and I'm going to show you what that means. So let's create a web server. This web server is also designed with server-side rendering capabilities in mind. So this is a good, simple example for you to parse through and see how you can use a React application to server render content within a backend web server. So under the server directory, we'll create a new file, and I called it server.js as well, and paste the content of this file in here. And I want to show you one thing that immediately happened. Look at this. ESLint is immediately telling me that I've used the console.log line. And it's giving me a warning. Do you really need to use the console.log line? Because you're not supposed to leave console logs behind in your code. But in this particular case, this console log is fine. And there are some ways to work around these cases at ESLint. All right, so let's keep going. This sample application is ready. Now you need two terminals to run two different commands. So I'm going to split this terminal horizontally here and invoke the command to run a development server. The server will run on port 4242 by default, and then invoke another command to run the bundler, to run Webpack, to take the React application and generate a single main.js bundle file for us to use in the web server. And guess what? This web server is already wired to use this main.js file, and the Express server is already wired to serve static files from the dist directory. So if you've done everything correctly, your server should be up and running on port 4242 in here. And there you go. The server is running. We have the sample button increment example that we've started with in this course in here, and things are working. And things are also server-side rendered. So what do I mean by that? I mean, if you go to the settings here and you completely disable JavaScript in here, and by disabling JavaScript, you can't run React in your browser, right? You don't have JavaScript, you don't have React. But if you refresh this application with JavaScript disabled, you will still get the exact same application because it's server-side rendered. So take a look at this sample application and try to understand what's going on. This is really one other good next step for you to dive into. I just pushed the code that we did under this GitHub repo. So github.com/jscomplete/rgs template. And I've also locked all the versions for their exact numbers as of now. This way, if you want to clone this repo and install the exact same versions, things should just work as is with the configuration that's stored in this repo. But if you want to live on the edge and get the latest and greatest, in the next video, I'll show you another way to get a bare-bone repo with the latest configuration and a little bit extra power to help you with your React applications.